The first person to understand that the Duchess of Wycliffe was not surrendering was the old steward. Everyone else thought she had finally been defeated. Lady Seraphina Vale stood before the long dining table at Ashcombe House, with one hand resting possessively on the Duke of Wycliffe's shoulder. Around them sat 14 members of the family council, 2 solicitors, 3 estate managers, and enough titled relatives to turn any private humiliation into a public execution. At the far end of the table, Eleanor, Duchess of Wycliffe, sat perfectly still. Before her lay a ring containing 7 heavy iron keys. The largest belonged to Ravensmere, the richest estate in the dukedom. 22,000 acres of farmland, forest, mills, tenant cottages, and the famous Blackstone Manor overlooking the River Alden. It had belonged to the Wycliffe family for nearly 2 centuries, and Seraphina wanted it. Not a house in London, not jewels, not an allowance, not horses. Ravensmere. The room had already endured 10 unbearable minutes of silence when Seraphina finally spoke. "I have been patient long enough." Eleanor looked at her. Seraphina's voice grew sweeter. "His Grace promised that I would never again depend upon the generosity of others. I therefore require something that cannot be withdrawn whenever Her Grace becomes displeased." A few relatives lowered their eyes. The Duke, Julian Wycliffe, shifted in his chair. He did not look at his wife. That hurt Eleanor more than Seraphina's words. Lord Harbury, Julian's uncle, cleared his throat. "Lady Seraphina, Ravensmere is not a trinket to be distributed after dinner." Seraphina smiled. "No, which is precisely why I chose it." Murmurs moved around the table. Julian finally spoke. "Seraphina." She turned toward him. "You said I should name what would make me feel secure. I did, and I have." Every eye moved to Eleanor. The scandal of Seraphina's presence had already poisoned London society, but this was something worse. A mistress asking for the finest property of a married duke, while his duchess sat 3 chairs away. Julian rubbed his forehead. "Eleanor?" She raised her eyes. For one hopeful second, he appeared ashamed. "Then he ruined it. Perhaps there is some arrangement that might avoid further unpleasantness." The old steward, Mr. Bellamy, stopped breathing. He had served Julian's father, and his grandfather. He had watched Eleanor spend 6 years saving Ravensmere from debts no dinner guest knew existed. He had watched her ride through winter rain to speak with tenants. He had watched her discover that the southern farms were being cheated by grain merchants. He had watched her turn an abandoned weaving house into profitable workshops employing 60 widows, and now her husband was asking her to surrender it so that his mistress might feel secure. Eleanor looked around the table. Her mother-in-law stared at the cloth. Julian's younger brother looked furious, but frightened. One cousin almost smiled. Seraphina's expression was victorious. Then Eleanor did something nobody expected. She smiled. Not bitterly, not desperately, almost warmly. "Ravensmere?" Seraphina hesitated. "Yes. You are certain?" Julian looked at Eleanor sharply. Seraphina lifted her chin. "Entirely." Eleanor picked up the ring of keys. The iron scraped softly across the polished table. Mr. Bellamy suddenly gripped the back of his chair. "Your Grace." Eleanor glanced at him once. That glance silenced him. She rose, walked around the table, stopped before the woman who had spent 18 months quietly occupying more and more space inside her marriage. Then Eleanor placed the keys into Seraphina's open palm. The weight made Seraphina's wrist dip. "There," Eleanor said. A stunned silence followed. Seraphina blinked. "You are giving it to me?" "You asked for Ravensmere." "Yes." Eleanor closed Seraphina's fingers around the keys. "Then you should have it." Julian stood abruptly. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" She turned toward him. "Ending an argument." Seraphina laughed softly. For the first time that evening, she looked almost uncertain. "You cannot regret this tomorrow." "Oh, I won't." Mr. Bellamy lowered his head. Because unlike everyone else in that room, he knew what Eleanor had spent the previous 3 months doing. He also knew what was hidden beneath Ravensmere. And he knew that Lady Seraphina Vale had just demanded possession of something far more dangerous than she understood. But Eleanor's next words shocked even him. "Since Ravensmere no longer requires my attention," she said, removing the Duchess's household ring from her finger, "I shall leave Ashcombe tonight." Julian went pale. "Leave?" Eleanor placed the smaller ring beside his wineglass. "Yes." Seraphina stopped smiling. And somewhere in the room, someone whispered, "My God." Eleanor looked at her husband one last time. He had expected tears, perhaps anger, perhaps another private conversation where she explained patiently why his latest cruelty could not continue. Instead, she gave him the same polite inclination of her head she gave distant acquaintances. "Good evening, Your Grace." Not Julian. Your Grace. For 6 years she had called him by his Christian name. That was when he finally understood something had broken, but he had no idea how completely. And to understand why Eleanor Wycliffe could hand another woman the keys to the greatest estate in the dukedom without shedding a tear, one must go back 4 months, before Seraphina made her demand, before Julian forgot which woman had kept his family standing, and before Eleanor discovered that Ravensmere did not belong to the person everyone believed it did. 4 months earlier, Eleanor was lying beneath a broken mill wheel. "Push." "I am pushing." "You are complaining." "I can do both." Thomas Pike, Ravensmere's miller, groaned as Eleanor braced both boots against a timber beam. Beside her, 15-year-old Ned Pike was attempting not to laugh. The wooden wheel had jammed after a flood carried branches into the sluice gate. Thomas had insisted the Duchess should return to the manor and allow workmen to deal with it. Eleanor had ignored him. "If this beam slips," Thomas warned, "His Grace will hang me. My husband barely knows where Ravensmere is. That does not comfort me." Ned finally burst out laughing. Eleanor did too. Then the beam shifted. "Now." Thomas dragged the trapped mechanism free. The wheel groaned, shuddered, and began moving. Water thundered through. Ned cheered. Eleanor emerged covered in mud from shoulder to hem. Mrs. Pike came running from the mill house. She stared at the Duchess. "Oh, Your Grace." Eleanor looked down at herself. "Is it terrible?" Mrs. Pike considered. "You have a frog on your sleeve." Eleanor froze. Ned nearly collapsed, laughing. The frog became a Ravensmere legend before sunset. By supper, someone had placed a tiny carved wooden frog beside Eleanor's plate. She pretended not to notice it. The next morning, it appeared on her writing desk. The following afternoon, inside her carriage. No one ever admitted responsibility. Eleanor secretly hoped they never would. Ravensmere was the only place where she was not required to perform being a duchess every waking moment. The estate had been nearly bankrupt when she married Julian. His father had borrowed heavily against its income. 2 managers had stolen from it. Tenant roofs leaked. The western fields flooded every spring. Julian had considered selling portions of the land. Eleanor had asked for 3 years. She needed 5. By the 6th, Ravensmere was profitable. Not because she possessed some magical talent for money. She made mistakes. Several. Her first attempt at breeding sheep had resulted in half the animals escaping through a poorly repaired fence and invading the rector's vegetable garden. Her decision to experiment with apple cultivation had produced so much rotten fruit that the village children still called one field the vinegar meadow. But she listened. She remembered. And when something failed, she returned the next morning rather than blaming someone beneath her. That was why the tenants trusted her. It was also why the letter awaiting her at Ashcombe House troubled her. Julian had written only 6 sentences. The last one read, "Lady Seraphina Vale will remain with us for several weeks. I expect you to receive her with civility." Eleanor read it twice, then folded it. Mrs. Brindle, Ravensmere's housekeeper, watched from across the room. "A difficult letter?" "No." Eleanor placed it beside her plate. That means yes, Mrs. Brindle said. Eleanor almost smiled. Mrs. Brindle was 63 and believed hierarchy was a regrettable administrative inconvenience. The Duke is bringing a guest. What sort? The sort who requires me to be civil. Mrs. Brindle's eyebrows rose. Ah, that sort. Eleanor returned to Ashcombe 2 days later. Seraphina Vale was already there. She was beautiful, certainly. But beauty was not what unsettled Eleanor. Seraphina understood rooms. Within minutes she knew whose opinion mattered, who could be ignored, who desired flattery, and who was insecure enough to be controlled by it. She never insulted Eleanor openly. She did something cleverer. She made Eleanor seem unreasonable whenever Eleanor resisted her. At breakfast, "Surely I may use the bay carriage, Your Grace." Julian said everything here should feel like home. At dinner, "I hope you do not mind that I move the musicians. Julian prefers them near the windows." In the drawing room, "Your Grace, forgive me. I wore emerald because Julian once said it was his favorite color. Small things, tiny invasions, individually laughable, together unmistakable." Julian saw none of it, or pretended not to. He had met Seraphina after a difficult parliamentary season in London. She made him laugh. She praised decisions Eleanor questioned. She never mentioned accounts, collapsing tenant cottages, delinquent managers, or obligations. With Seraphina, he felt admired. With Eleanor, increasingly, he felt measured. That was the weakness Eleanor had failed to understand until it was nearly too late. Julian did not want a woman who made his life better. He wanted one who made him feel better about himself. The first true warning came at a supper held for neighboring families. Seraphina was telling a story about a tenant who had approached her carriage at Wycliffe Park. "The woman actually expected me to listen to a complaint about drainage," she said, laughing. Several guests smiled politely. Eleanor did not. Seraphina noticed. "Have I offended you?" "No." "Then why do you look so serious?" "Because the woman's cottage flooded last winter." The table quieted. Julian sighed. "Eleanor, she has 3 children." "Not tonight." Seraphina gave an embarrassed little smile. "I suppose I am not as devoted to mud and ditches as Her Grace." Someone laughed. Eleanor looked toward Julian. He smiled too. That small smile hurt more than an argument would have. 3 days later, Eleanor learned Julian had ordered the drainage petition rejected. Not because repairs were impossible, because Seraphina wanted the river meadow cleared for a private riding course. Eleanor rode to the flooded cottages herself. The youngest child was sleeping upstairs because the downstairs bedroom smelled of damp. His mother apologized for the condition of the room. That apology decided everything. Eleanor returned to Ashcombe after dark. Julian was in his library. Seraphina was with him. "Cancel the riding course," Eleanor said. Julian stared at her. "Good evening to you too." The river meadow drains water away from 14 cottages. Cutting the embankment will flood them. Seraphina closed her book. "I was told the engineers approved it. They were never asked." Julian stood. "Eleanor, enough." "No." His expression changed. She rarely said that word to him. Seraphina watched carefully. Julian lowered his voice. "You are my wife." "Yes. You will not contradict me before my guests. Then do not make decisions about people you refuse to meet." Silence. Julian's face hardened. Seraphina rose. "I should leave." But she did not move quickly. She wanted to hear what came next. Julian looked at Eleanor with something colder than anger. "You have become very attached to Ravensmere." "I am attached to the people who live there. Perhaps too attached." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "What does that mean?" "It means you sometimes forget whose estate it is." She stared at him. Julian held her gaze. "Ravensmere belongs to me." The words struck harder than he intended, because 6 years of Eleanor's work disappeared inside them. Every repaired roof, every renegotiated debt. Every winter she spent checking grain stores. Every account book opened after midnight. His. All of it. Because his name sat above hers. Eleanor slowly removed her gloves. You are right. Julian blinked. He had expected resistance. Serafina's mouth curved faintly. Eleanor continued. I had forgotten. She turned and walked away. Neither of them noticed Mr. Bellamy standing in the corridor. But he noticed Eleanor. And the next morning, when she requested every original deed relating to Ravensmere going back 80 years, the old steward asked only one question. Are you certain you wish to know what your husband has never bothered to learn? Eleanor looked at the locked document chest. Yes. Bellamy placed the first yellowed bundle before her. For 3 days they worked. Mortgages, settlements, marriage portions, leases, maps. Until shortly after midnight on the third night, Eleanor found a document bearing the signature of Julian's grandfather. She read the first page, then the second. Then she stopped. Mr. Bellamy. The steward looked up. Eleanor's voice had changed. What is this? He came beside her. His face lost its color. Because the document did not merely concern Ravensmere. It contained a condition nobody in the current generation appeared to remember. And beside that condition was the name of a family Eleanor knew very well. Her own. Eleanor slowly raised her eyes. Does Julian know? Bellamy shook his head. No, Your Grace. Does Serafina? No. Eleanor looked back at the document. For the first time in weeks, something close to calm entered her face. Good. Because at that moment, Eleanor stopped trying to save her marriage and began preparing for the day they would force her to choose between protecting herself and protecting everyone who depended upon Ravensmere. For the next 9 days, Eleanor behaved as though she had discovered nothing. That frightened Mr. Bellamy more than anger would have. She attended breakfast, answered invitations, received tenants, sat through 2 dinners beside Julian without once mentioning the document hidden in the locked drawer of her writing desk. Serafina mistook Eleanor's silence for defeat. Julian mistook it for obedience. Both were wrong. Eleanor had simply learned something she could not afford to use carelessly. The forgotten deed stated that Ravensmere had not been purchased outright by the Wycliffe family. It had entered their control 71 years earlier through a marriage settlement between Julian's grandfather and a woman named Margaret Elliston. Margaret had been Eleanor's great-aunt, and the settlement contained an unusual condition. If the Wycliffe line attempted to sell, permanently transfer, or place Ravensmere beyond the protection of the lawful Duchess, without the consent of Margaret Elliston's surviving family trustees, control of the estate would revert. Not to Julian. Not to the Wycliffe title. To the Elliston descendants. Eleanor's family. But that was not the part that kept her awake. The document also mentioned a second agreement. A sealed supplemental trust. And that document was missing. Without it, Eleanor could prove almost nothing. What if it was destroyed? She asked Bellamy. Then we have an argument. And if it still exists? Then, the old steward said, we may have a weapon. Eleanor looked at him. I do not want a weapon. Bellamy gave her a tired smile. Everyone says that before someone else points one at them. Within a week, Eleanor quietly began searching. She wrote to the Elliston family solicitor. She examined old account books. She asked questions about Margaret without explaining why. And someone noticed. Serafina. At first, she only watched. Then she began asking questions of her own. One evening, Eleanor entered the library and found Serafina standing beside the cabinet containing estate correspondence. Serafina turned. Oh! Eleanor glanced at the cabinet. Looking for something? My shawl. In the document cabinet? Serafina smiled. I am forever misplacing things. So I have noticed. For one brief second, the sweetness disappeared from Serafina's face. Then it returned. You dislike me. Eleanor walked toward the writing table. I do not know you well enough for dislike. That is worse. Is it? Serafina studied her. You think Julian will tire of me? Eleanor opened a ledger. No. That answer seemed to surprise her. Serafina folded her arms. What do you think then? Eleanor looked up. I think eventually you will discover that winning someone who cannot be trusted is a very poor prize. Serafina's expression hardened. You think yourself superior because you are his wife. No. Eleanor lowered her gaze to the ledger. I think I was foolish, because I believed being his wife meant he would behave like my husband. Serafina left without another word. But the next morning, 3 of Eleanor's letters were missing. And 2 days after that, an unexpected visitor arrived at Ashcombe. His name was Gabriel Thorne. He carried no title, no crest, and apparently no understanding of proper arrival times. He rode into the courtyard shortly before breakfast, wearing a dust-covered coat, and arguing with the stablemaster about whether his horse required oats or rest first. Eleanor heard the disagreement from the terrace. The horse has been ridden since dawn, Gabriel said, and I have been managing these stables since before you learned to sit upright. Then you should know tired animals cannot eat properly. The stablemaster stared at him. Gabriel stared back. Eleanor approached. Is there a crisis? Both men turned. The stablemaster bowed. This gentleman insists upon reorganizing my profession. Gabriel removed his hat. I suggested water before oats. You suggested it 3 times. Because he ignored me twice. Eleanor almost laughed. The stablemaster looked betrayed. Gabriel Thorne was perhaps 35, though there was something in his manner that made age difficult to judge. He spoke like a man accustomed to being listened to, but dressed like one who preferred not to explain why. His boots were muddy. His gloves were worn, and beneath one arm he carried a leather case. Mrs. Wycliffe? He asked. The stablemaster made a choking sound. Gabriel frowned. Eleanor saved him. Duchess. He closed his eyes briefly. That would explain the choking. She smiled despite herself. Who are you? Gabriel Thorne. That explains nothing. It usually disappoints people. He handed her a letter. The seal belonged to the Elliston family solicitor. Eleanor's amusement vanished. She broke it immediately. The message contained only 3 lines. Your Grace, Mr. Thorne has been retained to assist with the Ravensmere matter. Trust his judgment, though perhaps not his manners. Burn this letter. Eleanor read it twice, then looked at Gabriel. You are a solicitor. No. Investigator? Occasionally. Accountant? He looked offended. Never. What exactly are you? Gabriel glanced toward the stablemaster. Currently, a man whose horse would benefit from water. The stablemaster muttered something and walked away. That was how Gabriel entered Eleanor's life. Not with romance. Not with elegance. With an argument about oats. He remained at Ravensmere rather than Ashcombe. Eleanor followed 2 days later, under the excuse of inspecting harvest accounts. By then, Julian had begun spending most evenings elsewhere. He barely objected. Serafina did. You seem remarkably interested in mud again, she remarked. Eleanor tied her bonnet. Yes, you may find society has forgotten you by the time you return. Eleanor looked at her. That sounds peaceful. At Ravensmere, she discovered Gabriel had already irritated almost everyone. Mrs. Brindle disliked the fact that he entered kitchens without permission. The blacksmith disliked the fact that Gabriel knew horses. The schoolmaster disliked the fact that Gabriel corrected his Latin. The village children adored him because he could toss an apple onto the roof of the bakery from across the square. And the wooden frog had migrated. Eleanor discovered it sitting on Gabriel's supper plate. He looked at it, then at her. What is this? A warning. Of what? Nobody knows. The next morning, the frog appeared inside his boot. For the first time, Eleanor heard him laugh. It was not the polished laugh of drawing rooms. It was sudden and helpless. She liked it more than she intended. Their work began that afternoon. Gabriel had traced Margaret Elliston's trustees to 3 families. 2 lines had died out. The third remained. A retired magistrate named Sir Oswin Carow had inherited his grandfather's papers. He lived 60 miles north. If the supplemental trust exists, Gabriel said, it may be with his family. Then we ask him. We already did. Eleanor looked up. He refused. Why? He says the Wycliffes ruined his father. That was new. Gabriel pushed a letter across the table. Sir Oswin's reply contained only one sentence. I will not open my grandfather's boxes to save another Wycliffe. Eleanor stared at it. He thinks this is for Julian. Everyone thinks everything involving a duke is for the duke. Can we go to him? Gabriel studied her. You? Yes. He may refuse to receive you. Then I shall be refused in person. A corner of Gabriel's mouth moved. Do you always solve problems by walking directly into them? No. She glanced toward the window, where a farmer was chasing one of the escaped sheep through the orchard. Sometimes they walk into me. The journey to Carow Hall took nearly a day. Sir Oswin received them only because Eleanor refused to leave his front steps. He was 70, sharp-eyed, and deeply suspicious. You are Julian Wycliffe's wife. Yes. Then I have nothing to say to you. Eleanor remained standing. I am also Eleanor Elliston. That stopped him. Sir Oswin's gaze narrowed. Elliston? My grandmother was Margaret's niece. He looked toward Gabriel. Gabriel said nothing. Finally, Sir Oswin stepped aside. Inside, he offered neither tea nor courtesy. My father lost half his fortune because the old duke manipulated a railway investment, he said. I did not know. Of course you didn't. Eleanor accepted the rebuke. Then I will not ask you to forgive him. Sir Oswin blinked. Most people defended powerful relatives automatically. Eleanor continued. I am asking whether your grandfather held documents relating to Ravensmere. Why? Because someone may attempt to transfer the estate. Sir Oswin laughed. Let them. 412 people live on land supported by Ravensmere's income. His laughter stopped. Eleanor leaned forward. If the estate is mishandled, tenants will be displaced. Mills may close. Farms already recovering from debt could fail. I am not asking you to help a Wycliffe. She paused. I am asking you whether your anger toward a dead man is worth punishing people who never met him. Sir Oswin stared at her for a very long time. Then he stood. Come upstairs. Gabriel glanced at Eleanor. She did not smile, but he did. The attic contained 6 trunks. They spent 4 hours opening them. Nothing. Another hour. Still nothing. Then Gabriel found a narrow compartment beneath the lining of an old dispatch box. Inside lay a packet sealed in dark green wax. Eleanor's heart began beating faster. Across the wax was stamped one word. Ravensmere. Sir Oswin looked shaken. Gabriel reached for it. Eleanor stopped him. Wait. She turned the packet over. On the reverse, in faded handwriting, was another inscription. To be opened only if the Duchess is threatened by the Duke. Nobody spoke. Gabriel finally said, That is unusually specific. Eleanor's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The supplemental trust was inside. But so was something else. A letter, written 71 years ago by Margaret Elliston herself. Eleanor began reading. Her eyes moved quickly at first, then slowly. By the final paragraph, the color had drained from her face. Gabriel noticed. What is it? Eleanor handed him the letter. Margaret had known exactly what might happen. Her marriage to the old duke had been miserable. He had tried repeatedly to seize the Elliston lands she brought into the marriage. So she had created a protection. Ravensmere could be controlled by a Wycliffe duke, only while his lawful wife retained full residential and administrative rights. If he voluntarily transferred the estate to another woman for personal benefit, the Wycliffe claim ended immediately. Ownership passed to Margaret's surviving blood descendants. Eleanor. Gabriel slowly lowered the paper. So if Julian gives Ravensmere to Seraphina, it becomes mine. Entirely. Eleanor nodded. Gabriel looked almost amused. That is astonishing. No. She reread the letter. It is sad. He frowned. Sad? Margaret wrote this because she knew another woman might someday be treated as she was. That answer changed something in Gabriel's expression. He had expected triumph. Instead, Eleanor was grieving for a woman dead before her grandmother was born. Later, while Sir Oswin arranged copies, Gabriel found Eleanor standing outside beneath an enormous cedar tree. You could tell Julian now, he said. Yes. He would never transfer Ravensmere. I know. Then why not? She looked across the fields. Because then nothing changes. Gabriel waited. Julian keeps Ravensmere, she said. Serafina moves on to something else. He apologizes because he nearly lost money. Everyone returns to dinner, and somehow I am expected to call that justice. What do you want? I want to know what he chooses when he thinks there is no consequence. Gabriel's face became serious. That is dangerous. So is spending your life wondering whether someone loved you or merely benefited from you. He had no answer. For the first time, Eleanor realized there was something wounded in him too. Something carefully hidden beneath dry humor. She did not ask. And because she did not ask, Gabriel stayed. Over the following weeks, they worked together frequently. Not intimately. Not yet. They reviewed contracts, visited farms, discovered that a grain supplier had been overcharging Ravensmere, argued over whether a damaged bridge should be repaired with stone or timber. Eleanor preferred stone. Gabriel preferred timber. Mrs. Brindle declared both of them useless and hired a local mason. The wooden frog continued migrating between their rooms. One morning, Gabriel placed it deliberately beside Eleanor's teacup. She stared at him. You admit responsibility? For this occasion. Then the mystery continues. There are larger mysteries, such as why anyone willingly eats Mrs. Brindle's porridge. From the doorway came Mrs. Brindle's voice. I heard that. Gabriel nearly dropped his spoon. Eleanor laughed until her eyes watered, and that frightened her, because she had forgotten laughter could feel safe. Meanwhile, at Ashcombe, Serafina's victory had begun to sour. Julian was restless. Without Eleanor managing correspondence, household disputes multiplied. 2 tenants appealed directly to him. He misplaced an important parliamentary document Eleanor would normally have organized. His mother complained that dinners were badly planned. His brother discovered 3 invoices had gone unpaid. This house ran perfectly before, Julian snapped. His brother stared at him. Yes. Julian did not understand the answer. Not yet. Then Serafina found one of the letters Eleanor had received from the Elliston solicitor. She had stolen it from the outgoing tray weeks earlier. Most of it meant nothing to her. But one phrase did. Questions regarding ownership. Serafina read it again. Ownership. That evening, she became unusually affectionate toward Julian. Within a fortnight, she had begun suggesting that her position was insecure. That Eleanor might return. That society laughed at women who depended entirely upon a man. That she needed something permanent. Julian resisted at first. Then she mentioned Ravensmere. Absolutely not. Serafina smiled. I knew you would say that. Then why ask? To see whether you trust me. It was clever. Julian heard accusation instead of greed. Soon Ravensmere was no longer about land. It was proof of love, proof of courage, proof that Eleanor did not control him. And every time Julian hesitated, Serafina quietly asked, Are you afraid of your wife? 3 weeks later, Julian wrote to Eleanor. Return to Ashcombe. A family council will meet on Thursday. Serafina has made a request that must be settled. Eleanor read the note at Ravensmere. Gabriel stood across the room. You know what she asked for? Yes. You know what will happen if you agree? Yes. And you are still going? Eleanor folded the letter. Yes. Gabriel's jaw tightened. Then I am coming. No. Eleanor. It was the first time he had used her Christian name. Both noticed. Neither commented. She shook her head. This is my marriage, and a legal matter involving hundreds of people, which is why you must remain here." He stared at her. "Why?" "Because if I am wrong about Julian—" She paused. "Someone must be ready to protect Ravensmere." Gabriel looked away. He did not like it, but he understood. Before she left the next morning, he handed her the wooden frog. Eleanor stared at it. "You stole this. Borrowed. Why? In case you forget, there are places where people laugh when you enter a room, instead of waiting to see what they can take from you." For a moment, she could not speak. Then she closed her fingers around it. At Ashcombe, the council assembled. Serafina made her demand. Julian failed to stop her, and Eleanor handed over the keys, exactly as she had known she might. But there was one thing Eleanor had not expected. Serafina did not simply want possession of Ravensmere. She wanted Eleanor removed from it immediately. And the following morning, before Eleanor could even leave Ashcombe, a messenger arrived from Ravensmere. He was pale, breathless. Mud covered his boots. "Your Grace." Eleanor rose. "What happened?" The messenger looked from her to Julian, then to Serafina. "The new orders reached Ravensmere before dawn." Eleanor froze. "What orders?" The man swallowed. "Lady Serafina has dismissed Mr. Bellamy." Julian stared at Serafina. She said nothing. "And there is more," the messenger whispered. "The southern tenants have been given 30 days to leave." The room erupted. Eleanor did not hear most of it. She heard only one thing: 30 days. Families she knew. Children she knew. People who trusted her. Serafina finally spoke. "The southern lands are unprofitable. I intend to lease them privately." Eleanor turned toward her. "You have not owned Ravensmere for 12 hours. Serafina smiled. "And already I am improving it." For the first time since this began, Eleanor's calm nearly broke. Julian stepped between them. "Serafina, reverse the order." "No." His face hardened. "I said reverse it. And I said Ravensmere was to be mine." Eleanor watched Julian. This was the moment. The first moment in which he understood the creature he had been feeding, with every concession. But understanding had come late. Far too late. Eleanor picked up her gloves. "Where are you going?" Julian demanded. "Ravensmere." "Eleanor, wait." She turned. He looked frightened now. Not angry. Frightened. "You cannot interfere. Legally, Serafina." Eleanor almost smiled. "Legally?" Something in the way she said the word made Mr. Bellamy's replacement at the doorway go still. Serafina narrowed her eyes. Eleanor walked toward the door, then stopped. Without turning, she said, "You wanted Ravensmere, Lady Serafina?" "Yes." "Then come tomorrow." Serafina frowned. "Come where?" "To the Southern Tenant meeting." Eleanor finally looked back. "Bring the keys." Serafina laughed. "Why?" Eleanor's face was unreadable. "Because tomorrow you are going to discover exactly what they open." And 60 miles away, Gabriel Thorne was already riding toward Ravensmere, with Margaret Elliston's sealed trust inside his coat. But someone else was following him. Someone who had learned enough about the document to know that if Gabriel reached Eleanor before the tenant meeting, Lady Serafina Vale might lose far more than an estate. The Southern Tenant meeting began without Gabriel. That was the first thing Eleanor noticed. The second was that Lady Serafina had brought witnesses. Not farmers. Not workers. Solicitors. 2 of them. She arrived at Ravensmere shortly before noon in Julian's black carriage, wearing dark blue velvet and carrying the estate keys on a silver chain at her waist. Behind her came Julian, his mother, Lord Harbury, and enough members of the Wycliffe family to make the tenant meeting look more like a trial. More than 100 people stood in the yard outside the old granary. Men who worked the southern fields. Women from the weaving houses. Mill workers. Farmers. Children who had been told to remain at home and had ignored the instruction. Mrs. Brindle stood near the granary steps with her arms folded. Mr. Bellamy stood beside her. Serafina spotted him immediately. "I dismissed you." Bellamy inclined his head. "So I was told." "Then why are you here?" Mrs. Brindle answered before he could. "Because we invited him." Serafina looked at her. "And who are you?" "Someone you'll remember." A few farmers coughed to hide their laughter. Even Eleanor had to look away. The wooden frog sat inside her coat pocket. She had kept it there since leaving Ashcombe. Serafina stepped onto the granary platform. "I will make this simple," she announced. "The southern leases are terminated. Compensation will be offered where appropriate. The land will be consolidated and rented commercially." The crowd erupted. A woman near the front shouted, "My family has farmed here 40 years." Another voice followed, "My mother lives in our cottage. What happens to the school? What happens to the mill?" Serafina raised one hand. "These decisions are final." Eleanor stood quietly at the side. Julian approached her. "Stop this." She looked at him. "Me? You know they will listen to you. They are not the people who need convincing." Julian lowered his voice. "I made a mistake." Eleanor's expression did not change. "Yes. I was angry." "Yes." Serafina manipulated. "No." That stopped him. Eleanor turned fully toward him. "Do not give her all the responsibility now simply because you dislike where your choices have led." Julian flinched. "You allowed this. You encouraged it, defended it, humiliated me for questioning it. And when she asked for Ravensmere, you looked at me and hoped I would make your cowardice convenient." His face reddened. "I never meant for tenants to be removed. Intentions are very comfortable things, Julian. Other people usually pay for them." He had no answer. Before he could try again, Serafina called from the platform. "Your Grace." Eleanor looked up. Serafina smiled. "Perhaps you would like to say goodbye to your tenants." A ripple of anger went through the crowd. Eleanor walked toward the platform. Serafina shifted slightly, making room. Eleanor did not climb the steps. Instead, she faced the people. "I owe you an apology." The yard fell silent. Serafina's smile grew. Eleanor continued. "I believed that because I could manage Ravensmere, I could protect it." She looked from face to face. "I was wrong." Julian stared at her. Mrs. Brindle did not. Neither did Bellamy. They knew there was more. "I should have understood sooner that good management is not the same thing as secure ownership." Serafina's smile vanished. One of her solicitors leaned toward her. Eleanor continued. "You were told to leave your homes because the person issuing those orders believed the estate belonged to her." Serafina stepped forward. "It does." Eleanor turned. "Does it?" Serafina reached for the keys at her waist. "You handed them to me?" "Yes." "Before witnesses?" "Yes." "Then what exactly are you attempting?" Eleanor almost smiled. "I am waiting." "For what?" "Someone very late." As if summoned by the words, hoofbeats sounded beyond the gate. Everyone turned. A horse came through the arch at speed. Gabriel, dust-covered, breathing hard, alive. Eleanor's relief was so strong she nearly moved toward him. Nearly. He dismounted and held up a leather case. "Sorry," Mrs. Brindle shouted. "You should be." The crowd laughed. The tension broke for 1 second. Then Eleanor saw the torn shoulder of Gabriel's coat. Her smile disappeared. "What happened?" "Someone attempted to persuade me not to come." "Who?" Gabriel looked toward Serafina. One of Serafina's solicitors went pale. Gabriel noticed. "So, that answers that." The solicitor stepped backward. Serafina looked sharply at him. "What have you done?" The man said nothing. Julian stared between them. Gabriel climbed onto the platform. "I was followed outside Moorfield. 2 men tried to take my case. One was remarkably bad at riding." "That is your explanation?" Eleanor asked. "You wanted me quickly. I wanted you intact." That was implied less clearly. Despite everything, she laughed once. Then Gabriel opened the case. The laughter died. He removed the trust. Serafina's expression changed. What is that? Eleanor climbed the steps now. Not beside Serafina. Opposite her. This, she said, is why I gave you the keys. Serafina laughed, but there was fear in it. You cannot undo a legal transfer because you changed your mind. I have not changed my mind. Gabriel handed the document to Lord Harbury. Julian's uncle read. His face went white. He read again. Then he looked at Julian. You fool. Julian stepped forward. What? Lord Harbury thrust the papers toward him. Read. Julian did. The silence that followed was almost complete. Only the creak of the granary doors could be heard. Serafina's voice sharpened. What does it say? Julian did not answer. Eleanor did. Ravensmere entered Wycliffe control through my family. Serafina stared at her. No. Yes. The estate has belonged to the dukedom for generations. Controlled by it. Not owned without condition. Gabriel continued. The original settlement gave the Wycliffe Duke control only while Ravensmere remained under the protection of his lawful duchess. Serafina looked from one face to another. This is absurd. It becomes less absurd in the next clause, Gabriel said. Eleanor watched Serafina carefully. If a duke voluntarily transfers Ravensmere to another woman for his personal benefit, the Wycliffe claim ends. Serafina's face emptied. No. Eleanor reached down and lifted the silver chain from Serafina's waist. She did not pull it away. She merely held one key. You demanded Ravensmere. Serafina stepped backward. You agreed. I did. You cannot use my own request against me. It was never about trapping you. That surprised everyone. Even Gabriel. Eleanor's voice softened. I needed Julian to choose. Julian looked at her. She did not look back. If I had shown him this trust before the council, he would have protected Ravensmere, because he feared losing it. Now she did look at him. I needed to know whether he would protect me when he thought there was no consequence. Julian's face broke. Eleanor turned back to Serafina. And I needed to know whether you wanted security or control. Serafina's breathing became shallow. You planned this. No. Eleanor shook her head. I prepared for it. That was worse. The distinction landed heavily. Lord Harbury looked at Julian. The transfer was witnessed. One of the solicitors nodded reluctantly. And recorded, Gabriel added, which means Ravensmere reverted the instant Lady Serafina accepted it. Serafina stared at Eleanor. To whom? Eleanor held her gaze. To me. The yard exploded. Gasps, shouts, laughter. Someone began clapping. Then everyone did. The sound rolled across the stone walls. Serafina stood frozen. Julian closed his eyes. Eleanor had entered the meeting as the discarded wife of a duke. She now stood as the legal owner of the most valuable estate the Wycliffes had possessed. But she did not smile. Not yet. She looked toward the tenants. The notices are cancelled. The cheering grew louder. The leases remain. Someone shouted her name. The school remains. Another cheer. The mill remains. Children screamed. And before Mrs. Brindle frightens anyone into silence, I heard that! The crowd erupted in laughter. Even Bellamy laughed. Eleanor reached into her pocket. She placed the wooden frog on the granary rail. The children immediately recognized it. Ned Pike shouted, It was Gabriel! Gabriel pointed at him. Traitor. For a moment, the entire meeting became something warm, alive. Then Serafina ruined it. You think this makes you noble? Everyone quieted. Serafina's eyes burned. You think because farmers cheer for you, you have won? Eleanor turned. I do not need you to believe I won. You humiliated me. No. Eleanor's voice remained calm. You did that when you demanded something simply because you believed another woman could not stop you. Serafina's chin trembled. For the first time, the audience saw something beneath her pride. Fear. You had everything, she said. A title, a house, respect. You do not understand what it is to have nothing permanent." Eleanor studied her, and suddenly, Serafina made more sense. Not enough to excuse her, but enough to understand her. "You are right," Eleanor said. Serafina blinked. "I had things you wanted." Eleanor stepped closer. "But you did not want Ravensmere because you loved it. You wanted proof that Julian would take something from me and give it to you." Serafina said nothing. "That is not security." Eleanor looked at Julian. "That is competition." Julian lowered his head. Serafina's eyes filled. "Then what happens to me?" Eleanor could have destroyed her. Everyone expected it. Instead, she said, "You leave Ravensmere today." Serafina stiffened. "You will receive no estate, no cottages, no tenant income." Serafina's face hardened again. "But the personal settlement Julian already signed for you will remain." Julian looked shocked. "Eleanor," she ignored him, "it is enough for you to live independently." Serafina stared. "Why?" "Because I will not punish you by making you dependent upon another careless man." That broke something in her. She looked away, not grateful, not yet, but ashamed. Eleanor did not demand an apology. Some lessons needed silence first. The solicitor who had arranged the men to stop Gabriel was dismissed immediately and later investigated by the magistrate. The second solicitor cooperated fully. Serafina left before sunset. Alone, Julian remained. For 3 days. He did not ask Eleanor to return to Ashcombe. That was the first intelligent thing he had done in months. On the second morning, he repaired fences with the southern tenants. Badly. On the third, he sat with Bellamy and reviewed every eviction notice personally. Then he went to Eleanor. "I cannot fix what I did." "No, I cannot ask you to forget it." "No, I cannot even ask you to forgive me." Eleanor looked at him. "That is true." He swallowed. "But I can stop behaving as though apologies are actions." For the first time, she saw something different in him. Not charm, not wounded pride. Responsibility. Small, late, but real. Eleanor eventually permitted him to visit Ravensmere. Then to attend meetings. Months passed before she called him Julian again. She never returned to Ashcombe as his wife. Their marriage ended formally the following year. Quietly, without scandal. And surprisingly, without hatred. Because sometimes, forgiveness did not mean returning. Sometimes it meant refusing to carry bitterness into the next room. Gabriel stayed. At first because Ravensmere required legal restructuring. Then because the bridge still needed repairing. Then because Mrs. Brindle claimed the estate could not survive without someone to criticize her porridge. Months turned into a year. He and Eleanor argued. Frequently. About timber. About wages. About whether her habit of visiting flooded fields personally was brave or foolish. "It is both," he told her. "That is not an answer. It is the only accurate one." He never treated her like a rescued woman. That was what she loved first. He treated her like a capable woman who occasionally needed someone to tell her when she was being impossible. She returned the favor. One autumn afternoon, they stood beneath the cedar tree at Carrow Hall, where the old trust had first been opened. Gabriel held something behind his back. Eleanor narrowed her eyes. "If that is the frog, it is not." It had better not be jewelry hidden inside the frog. That would be alarming. He brought his hand forward. No ring. Only one small iron key. Eleanor looked at it. "What does it open?" "A cottage." "Whose?" "Mine." She looked at him. Gabriel suddenly seemed less certain than she had ever seen him. "It has 3 rooms. A bad chimney. A garden that appears determined to die." "Romantic." I panicked. She smiled. He held out the key. "I know what keys have meant in your life." Her smile faded. "Things people thought they could take." He nodded. "So I thought perhaps one could mean something else." "What?" "A choice." He placed the key in her palm. "If you never use it, The cottage remains mine." She looked down. "If you use it, the door opens. And if I want something larger than a cottage?" Gabriel considered. "We negotiate." She laughed. Then he said quietly, "I do not want Ravensmere." She looked at him. "I do not want your fortune." He stepped closer. "I do not even particularly want your dreadful sheep. They are excellent sheep. They invaded a rectory. That was years ago. They have a reputation." She was laughing again when his voice softened. "I want the woman who handed away an estate because she refused to let property decide whether someone valued her." The laughter left her slowly. "I want the woman who notices leaking roofs before titles, who gives people dignity before they ask, who can lose everything respectable society tells her matters, and somehow become more herself afterward." He paused. "And I would like to spend the rest of my life disagreeing with her about bridges." Eleanor stared at the key, then at him. "You prefer timber. It is cheaper. It rots. Stone cracks. This proposal is deteriorating." "I know." She kissed him before he could make it worse. They married the following spring. No grand cathedral. No enormous aristocratic guest list. The ceremony took place at Ravensmere. Mrs. Brindle cried and denied it. Bellamy carried the rings. Ned Pike somehow tied the wooden frog to the back of Gabriel's carriage. The entire village knew who had done it. Nobody told. Years later, the frog still sat on the mantel in Eleanor and Gabriel's house. Beside it hung 2 keys. One silver, one iron. The silver key had once belonged to Ravensmere. The iron one had opened a small cottage that Eleanor and Gabriel never actually lived in, because the roof collapsed before the wedding. Gabriel insisted this proved stone buildings were overrated. Eleanor insisted it proved he should never be trusted with property. And sometimes, when visitors heard the story of how a duke's mistress demanded the richest estate in the county, and the Duchess smiled as she surrendered the keys, they imagined Eleanor had known from the beginning that she would win. She had not. She had known only one thing. If love required her to surrender her dignity in order to keep it, then whatever remained was not worth keeping. And that became the lesson Ravensmere remembered long after titles changed hands. A key can give someone possession of a house, but only character determines who deserves to be trusted with a home.